Frank O'Connor talking in 1961, where he said that Cork City had a mental age of 18. He was asked, what does that mean? He says, well, you know, that's the mental age at which a person of intelligence should get the hell out of Cork. And he said that as long as Cork produced people with the intelligence and the gumption to get out of it, its existence would not be in vain. Now, a lot of people took that advice. Theodorgan took that advice. Patrick Galvin took that advice. Greg Delanty took that advice. For many years, the writing scene in Cork was maintained by blow-ins, people like John Montague, and Thomas McCarthy, and Sean Dunn. If we didn't have people with the good sense and the intelligence to move from the outside to Cork, we might have had no writing scene at all in the city. Now, those other names I've mentioned have been augmented by a lot of Cork writers now who see that Cork is no longer the sort of city which you must leave in order to establish a writing career and find a readership. And they've been joined by people like James Harper and Matthew Sweeney to boot. And it's an example of Matthew Sweeney that's inspired me to establish 2 writing fellowships in the last few years, the John Montague International Poetry Fellowship and the Frank O'Connor International Short Story Fellowship, because I saw the dynamic energy that Matthew brought to Cork and inspired in the writers living in Cork. And I said, well, if we can replicate that on a regular basis by bringing other writers of high stature and international repute to the city, it would be a very good thing. So Matthew had been a visitor to the city on and off over the years, visiting various festivals, not least the ones curated by myself. In fact, my first meeting with Matthew was around 1990, and the first words out of his mouth were, "So, Pat, I hear you like adjectives a lot." We shared the same publisher and editor, and that first encounter didn't stop me inviting him back to Cork in subsequent years, and we were extremely lucky, I think all of us, when he accepted an invitation for a 2-month residency and found reasons during that 2 months to stay on in Cork ever since, ending a peripatetic journey which had brought him from London to Romania to Berlin. Speaking of the poet Pegeen Kelly, who died last year at 65, Stephen Dobbins said, "Not only are her poems brilliantly written, they give pleasure." And he said, it's very rare to have those 2 qualities in the one poet. And that's something that is characteristic as well of Matthew's work. It's work that's very well crafted and which always at the top has the motivation to give pleasure to the reader contained within it. It's interesting to come across a blurb on the back of one of Matthew's books I hadn't seen in a long time. Sweeney shakes us into tragedy, yet paradoxically does not manipulate us. He writes vividly and is as accomplished with form and rhyme as he is with disciplined verse libre. And that was said by Elizabeth Jennings, a poet one would have thought was aesthetically poles apart from Matthew Sweeney, but yet recognised Matthew's integral qualities, his core qualities. He's a poet who's been very much influenced by his love of German writing, Trakl, Franz Kafka in particular, and that marks him out as a rarity in the Irish literary scene, and possibly accounts for the fact that he doesn't have as high a profile in his own country as he does abroad. I remember reading an article in Poetry Review recently where I just referred to him as Sweeney. They didn't have to say Matthew Sweeney. In England you say Sweeney the poet and everybody knows who you're talking about. He's probably the most translated living Irish poet. Maltini is gone. I don't think there's any other poet who has so many books published in other languages throughout Europe. I could speak a long time, but listen, Matthew wants to share some of his poems with you, so I'd like to invite Matthew up.
When the moon fell out of the sky, I prayed to the sun like an Inca, asking the great God to find his pale godson and bring him back up high to light up my nights. 3 lads didn't do it and never reached the sea or the mountain. The 2 terrain that formed the backdrop to my existence. I shaped my prayer into a quiet song that I intoned to a sunflower that grew in an earthenware pot in my garden, all the while watched by a black cat that belonged to my neighbor. And when I'd finished, the cat and I watched the moon rise like a football and regain its rightful place in the sky. I don't do realism. The message, it took them 2 minutes to realize the message the boy had brought him was encrypted. How on earth was he to read it? Who sent it? He held a piece of black paper up to the sun, so the white lettering shone. It may as well have come from the moon. He noticed the boy was sitting on the wall, swinging his legs. Was he waiting on some kind of a reply? This was too much pressure for a man trying to light a barbecue with guests due to arrive any minute. Took a swig of Rioja, as if this would unlock his brain. The message looked like no language he'd seen, and nor was it figure or symbol. It could have been written by a crow. The loud laughs of 2 women arriving with a wine bottle spooked him. What could he do? The boy was watching him. Maybe one of his guests could decode the message. People could surprise one. Anyway, it was time to see to his guests. He wondered if the boy was hungry. He might welcome the offer of a cocktail.
Hi. Delighted to been asked to read 2 poems from Matthew's brilliant new collection, which I can't recommend enough. Sorry? Oh, I'm Deane, by the way. I'm Deane Browne. I've just been reminded of my identity. Yeah, Pat spoke of Matthew's acceptance in Cork, which I think kind of worked in two ways. Like I was 17 or 18 when I came to Cork, and Matthew was writer-in-residence in UCC at that time, and he's just been a great teacher and friend to me since, and to other young writers who I think were kind of transformed by his teaching in a way and by his poetry, which seemed to be totally different. Kind of, as Pat also pointed out, a kind of Irish poem, but with German parents. The poem I'm going to read, the first poem, is called 5 Yellow Roses. What stopped her bawling was the doorbell ringing, and a man standing there with 5 yellow roses, bulked up with green fronds and tied in a dinky knot with olive twine. There was no card to say who the flowers came from. The man's uniform was blue, with a brown insignia of a spider on his right top pocket that she saw he kept unbuttoned. As he waltzed down the path to the gate, the Siamese cat that frequented the garden raised its back and hissed. The man laughed and flounced out to his waiting white van. Oh, the shit-faced side streets of life. Okay, she'd been born in Madras in a flowery tea shop while an albino conjurer magicked a hare to leap from his heavily ringed brown fingers. 5 yellow roses, enough to encourage her to cook saffron rice with turmeric-tinged prawns and sautéed yellow courgettes. She didn't play the rye cooder where yellow roses say goodbye. And the second poem is called The Bunker. When the neighbor's TV aerial snapped off and flew away like a tiny spaceship, and a toddler I'd never seen was deposited by a wind in my garden and ran away laughing, I decided to inquire about second-hand nuclear bunkers. They block gamma rays, you see, and the world was weirding. Anyway, I was directed to eBay, and sure enough found plenty. I opted for the one in Wicklow, an ancient C&D buff on his uppers. Weren't we all? So I took 3 buses to see him and his bunker. It was thorough, but untested. It was also untransportable. Still, I decided to shell out for it. He produced sherry and wild mushroom vol au vents. He played Coltrane's My Favourite Things. I found him altogether agreeable. A white van arrived from Cork with me in it. Also 2 shovels, a pickaxe, and a pair of Polishmen. Together we made a lot of noise and dust. I shook hands with the nice old man. Then the 3 of us took off back south, and the guys agreed to rebuild the bunker in my basement. They needed to make a few tunnels, but we didn't tell the neighbours. And they did okay. I paid them well. Most nights now I sleep down here. I play contemporary European jazz. My dreams on the whole are better. Thanks.
Meh. That's the title of the poem, just in case any were wondering. 61. Before I could speak properly, like many tiny twits, I made up my own words, some of them better than any I've found in all the lingos I've sampled. I mean, take this one, it's a meh. Well, I couldn't have managed the intro words, but I'd shout, meh, and I'd point at it and back away from it at speed to hide under the biggest cushion in the house, where I'd quake like the jellyfish I once saw in the sea, waiting for the meh to float upstairs, stretch itself and gobble me. I should try to translate the word, but we know how hard translation is. For example, if I say it was a feather, the whole terror aspect is lost. Who fears a feather? But the visual aspect of a meh was indeed a feather. And again, apart from its scariness, it introduced me to the spin of magic and metaphor. How, I don't know, but whenever I saw a meh on the floor, the world would be hopping and suggesting this, that, and the other. Not that I could have articulated such stuff. So maybe it was the first sign that I was meant to become a macker, and I should now make a hat of feathers. The old Christmas tree is gone. It lay in the corner of the garden like the corpse of a soldier from mid-January to mid-June, getting paler by the day, by the week, like a drying seaweed. I wanted to bring it in again and set it up where it used to be, in front of the window blocking the TV, soaking up the music that flowed around it and maybe through it, though I didn't know how porous its brown leaves or needles remained. I went away, leaving it there, and a man came to cut the grass and remove the cuttings and the petrified tree. It was like a fallen statue had been taken away, one the blackbird had often sat on and sung to me from. I lay down where it had been, and I slept to dream of Christmas, the presents placed under me, the gonks, cards, and angels in my branches, and me green again.
Hello, my name's Jo Shapcott. I'm an old friend of Matthew's from his London days, when he was very much the centre of what was happening in poetry in the 80s, I guess, and the early 90s, and really famous for supporting other poets, bringing them on, and being a really generous and important spirit. We went on to edit an anthology together called Emergency Kit, Poems for Strange Times, still in print. It's an excellent book. And we had fun putting the poems together, choosing them for the anthology. Too much fun, so that one time we were in the poetry library in London trying to select poems, finding poems that delighted us and rather laughing at them. And we got thrown out of the poetry library for laughing. In those days, Matthew was a golfer, and I also remember when we disagreed about a poem, he making me putt against him for the poem. It's true, isn't it? The hole up. Lying on your mouth and nose on the hot sand, you recall a trip in a boat to the island, the fat rats that skittered about after God knows what dinner, the chubby seals staring up, the sudden realization that a man on the run had wintered there while the soldiers scoured the entire shoreline to no avail. And you knew now you could have been him out there. You could taste the raw seagull you'd killed and plucked, the mussels you dug from sand, the jellyfish that wobbled in your hands as you slobbered it. You saw again that first flame, those rubbed stones woke in the driftwood pile, And that rat you grilled on a spar and found delicious. Yes, you'd been that man, and you had to admit now you missed that time, that life, though you were very glad you had no memory of how it ended. It's a treat, really, to help Matthew launch this fine book, and very difficult to choose among the poems. They are all vintage Sweeney. So he helped me with the next one in that he asked me to read it because it's dedicated to his Auntie Nell, who I believe is here. What odds for Auntie Nell? You'll have to forgive my English London tones in this one. When the red setter ran up the field after the sheep, and the farmer dug out his shotgun, and I ran screaming to drive the dog away down to the beach and into the sea, then slunk with him back up the hill to the big white house, where I shaved off my beard in a frenzy. What odds, my aunt said, what odds? When the poisonous jellyfish washed up on the beach and the Gardaí came to warn everyone to stay away, even the windsurfers who ignored them and squelched with their flippers out to the waves that rose so high they felt they were free, and children cried because they couldn't bathe. What odds, my aunt said, what odds? When the helicopter crashed onto the turf house and the winter's turf went on fire, and only the quick-thinking neighbours attaching the hose to the outside tap made inroads enough on the flames to enable the fire brigade to douse them and save the house from the inferno. What odds, my aunt said, what odds? When the storm from space struck and the tsunami savaged the beach and swarmed up the road to engulf the big house, sending us all up to the flat roof above the scullery, pulling doors off their hinges to float on when water rose, and gangs of gulls swooped low, shrieking overhead. What odds, my aunt said, what odds?
Hello, my name is Mary Noonan, and I first met Matthew in 2007 when he was here acting as a mentor for the Munster Literature Centre, and Pat Cotter selected me and John Mee and Adam Wyeth to be mentored by Matthew. And of course, my life changed forever at that point. Matthew has written a lot of travel poems. He seems to have travelled an inordinate amount in his life, all over the world. I don't think I've ever met anyone who travelled quite as much as him. But when you read his poetry, or at least when I read it, it strikes me that a lot of the places are countries of the mind. And this strikes me as one of those. The poem is called The Hidden Oasis. Finding the entrance to the hidden oasis is trickier than winning a race when blind and lame and sleep deprived for 3 nights. It can be done, I know, but only with perverse willpower. And if you do blunder in, a mad camel with foul breath will roar at you, sounding like it's being strangled. But if you kiss it on the lips, it will bow and back away. And you'll smell the delicate scent of 3 different gazelle meats being grilled with fresh thyme. And these will be served to you with a poached ostrich egg, palm wine, and flatbread cooked in the sand, while skilled musicians play the blues on ouds that lead you to a luminous yellow hammock where you stretch yourself out like a corpse to dream you're outside and can't get in. He told me a secret that it's actually a poem about writing poetry, which probably won't come as a surprise to a lot of people in the room. Of course, there are a lot of Donegal poems in Matthew's oeuvre, and this is one of them. It's difficult to get from Cork to Donegal if you don't drive, and Matthew is very like, again, a lot of poets because he doesn't drive. And so when he goes to Cork, to Donegal, he takes a train to Dublin, and then he has to get various buses and things to get to his own village, Ballyliffin, in the Inishowen Peninsula. The North Wind. I carried my 3 bags down the road from the bus into the teeth of the north wind. There was a minuscule polar bear in each gust, and they were biting, then spitting bits of me out onto the road, where rats could devour them. I was much smaller when I lugged the 3, rucksack on my right shoulder, laptop bag on my left, canvas bag of presents in my right hand, up what we called the loaning, a leaf-framed uphill lane from the road. But I was still big enough to slip and fall on wet moss just as I was reaching the house after 9 hours on trains, trams, or buses from Cork. And my jeans got caked in mud. The north wind blew into my horizontal face, and I swear it laughed at me. I struggled to my feet and gained entry to the house, dumping my bags inside the door. I recovered a bottle of Rioja from the rucksack, and I uncorked it, filling a glass to the brim, then bringing this to the reopened door before downing it in one slug, ignoring the north wind. Thank you.
Good evening, I'm Maurice Riordan. I'm honoured to be here actually to celebrate Matthew's new book, his 12th book. And you'll have gathered already that it's entertaining. It's inventive, darkly funny, brilliant and vivid. I first set eyes on Matthew Sweeney almost exactly 35 years ago in the old Triskel in Bridge Street. And that was, I can remember what he was wearing. I can remember the poems. Golfer was one of them, the poems he read. It was my introduction to Sweeney land, yeah. But I had no intimation really that night that I would sort of, have an intimate relationship with Matthew's poems for, all the intervening years. And many of them in recent years have turned up, thrillingly in my inbox in the morning. I think the idea of a poem, the idea of the thrill of a poem turning up in your inbox in 1983 would have been an obscene thought. Anyway, I've chosen 2 poems that are based on that kind of initial thrill of reading a new Matthew poem. First one is called Frogman. And actually it begins with a line I think that all Cork writers perhaps all Cork people have kind of secretly written in their heads. But Matthew Sweeney writes it down and then carries it to its ultimate conclusion. Frogman. When the river rose as much as he had hoped it would, and the first wavelets explored Curl's Quay, he ran back up the hill to his house, unlocked the heavy door, took the stairs 2 at a time, stood on a chair to rummage on top of the wardrobe till he got all of his diving suit that he'd secreted there. Laying it on the bed, he admired it, not black like most suits, but dark green, ordered from Russia. He undressed and got into the dry suit, checking how he looked in the mirror. He strapped on the backpack box and stuck his head in the diving mask, the flippers he'd kept till he was entering the water. Switching on the TV to see the progress of the flood, he saw it was overrunning the city centre. Excellent, he thought, locking the door and loping down the path. His neighbour laughed loudly at the sight of him, but he ignored the man, foregoing his usual greeting. Minutes later, the drivers couldn't look at the road. Halfway across the shaky bridge, he donned his flippers, hopped up on the parapet and dived in. 2 boys saw the splash and cheered. He swam on, rolling over quickly to see the stream of bubbles in his wake. He felt as lean in the water as a combat diver. Maybe he should have brought a knife and a limpet mine. When he came to the bridge by the Gate Cinema, he had no need to climb out. No, he swam over the wall and down the middle of North Main Street. Cars were stalled, half submerged. A young man splashed alongside him, fully clothed and singing. Ahead, a female Garda was attempting to direct the traffic. He darted past her alongside a pair of startled grills. Seagulls were circling overhead as he veered left to Dawn Square, where 2 men waded with a statue of the Virgin, trying to get the flood to subside. Yeah, the water was rising. Soon it would be over the roofs. He looked forward to being the city's last survivor. Some blowing, eh? And the red helicopter. Who authorized the red helicopter to fly over the city and stay buzzing there, cruising in wide, slow circles like a giant vulture? The noise crashed into my sleep yesterday morning before I knew what it was. Then, when I realized, I looked out and saw nothing through though the blades kept whirring, getting louder, then quieter, but never stopping. They wouldn't until they'd found what they were looking for. I ducked under them to go into town to buy dinner. A cloud emptied, so I taxied home and heard a search was on for a 63-year-old man. I was that man, but what had I done? Had I killed someone and not noticed? I went into the kitchen, played Coltrane so loud it silenced the helicopter. I also attacked the Scottish malt. This morning the noise whacked me again, so I ripped the shutters open, and there it was, big and red in the sky. It was hovering right above the house. There was no hiding place anymore. I pulled on my kimono, marched out, barefoot, onto the terrace to stand there.
It's me. I've been meeting Matthew for, gone on 10 years now, almost weekly, in the farm gate for lunch. And we discuss everything and anything, including poetry, occasionally, or the Champions League. This is called Donegal. Why is the bin lorry stopped outside the cemetery? Why is the caravan planted in the middle of the field? Why is the fleet of buses parked for months in the yard? Why is the boat upside down on the side of the hill? The answer to all these questions is they're in Donegal. Go out to our islands, make a start at Innistrothel, photograph the dog's tombstone in the tiny graveyard where most of the other graves have wooden crosses. Next, try Arranmore, observe the wrecked cars in the field, and take a drink in any bar and find it doesn't shut. Lastly, be good to yourself and take a boat to Ilan Tori. We met on the pier by the king of the island with his accordion. And he'll lead you to his favourite bar where he'll sink brandies and pay for none of these, and he'll produce his naive paintings for you to peruse in the sureness you'll have no option but to purchase one. Then he'll sign, then serenade and toast you, after which you might want to walk out to the lighthouse under the full moon, followed by the last corncrake, and you'll feel blessed to have ended up in Donegal. Why did you leave it? Beggars. Favourite subject of mine too, actually. The sun brings the beggars out. As well as the regulars, twice as many are sitting on the pavements with paper cups in front of them. Some are undecided. One had a motor organ sitting on a cap, and a woman said she would give him nothing until he played, so he did, badly, but no matter. The regulars are annoyed. One young shark is flashing his eyes as if to say he's the serious one among all these amateurs, and I must admit, I believe he has a point, although I've passed him 100 times and haven't given him 50 cents. No, I haven't even weakened slightly from my long-term hardline stance. Anyway, I head to the market, buy my organic rocket leaves and giant radishes, pop into the Mutton Lane for a pint, flick through the Irish Times, then trudge off back up Sundayswell Road. Where halfway I'm overcome and lie down on the warm pavement for a snooze, taking my cap off and laying it down. I wake up to find €10, 37 cents inside it. Thank you.
I love the American poet Frank O'Hara. Epigraph from I am not a painter. I am a poet. Why? I think I would rather be a painter, but I am not. My life as a painter. The 3 small birds my father brought me on a plate had been shot by him the week before. Then plucked, gutted, and pot roast, not by him, but by my grandfather. And my father sat down opposite me, asking me to sample each, then tell him which I preferred. One was a stag, one a crake, one a wood pigeon. I tasted them all, picked out the last shot, and liked the pigeon. My father laughed and said it was his least favorite, or maybe he claimed to enjoy all the birds equally. I often find a wish going through me to remake myself as a painter. Those 3 birds would be perfect for my first work. I wouldn't depict my father on the hill with the shotgun, or Rosa, the red setter, running to collect the birds. No, I say faithful to the old concept of the still life, or in French, nature morte. Birds on a plate, nothing else. I might add a few colors that weren't there, and I'd follow up with a long, flat portrait of 3 spectacular blue molded loaves, all of them right, and I want a glass of red wine now.